So, welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So, this is episode 91, which is a really great group chat that we just had with Joseph Woodbury, who's the CEO of Neighbor. So, Neighbor is a leading peer-to-peer marketplace for self-storage that's rapidly scaling, and it's raised over 60 million from top funds like Andreessen Horowitz and strategic investors like executives from DoorDash, StockX, and Uber, to name a few. So, this is a really great group chat with Joseph, where we got to learn more about the founding story of Neighbor, did a deep dive into it as a leading peer-to-peer marketplace, got to learn more about the recent growth, what the fundraising journey was like, and also had a great Q&A for those on the chat. So I really enjoyed this conversation and know you're going to find it a great watch to the end. So Joseph, welcome to the group chat. And this has been a long time in the works, so it's definitely great to have you join us here today. Many of us have heard of Neighbor, as it comes up quite regularly in the community as an example of a leading peer-to-peer marketplace. So I'm really excited to dive into things with you here and learn more about it. Before we do, though, I think it might be great if you can start off by sharing a little bit more on your background for those that don't know you, and then the founding story of Neighbor.
Absolutely. So Neighbor's a student-created startup. We started this out of school. There's three co-founders, myself, Preston Alder, who runs our brand marketing team, and Colton Gardner, who runs our support and trust and safety and marketplace quality functions. And we started this really our senior year of school. The summer before our senior year, I was on the professional services track. I had worked in an investment bank and a private equity firm, and then interned for a consulting firm called Bain & Company. And they gave me a full-time offer, and I accepted it and went back for my senior year. This is Brigham Young University, BYU in Utah. Preston Alder, my co-founder, that same summer I was at Bain, he went down to this humanitarian org based out of South America, he and his wife. He ran this little videography firm. He'd go film for state departments down there and humanitarian orgs. And he and his wife had just gotten married, so they needed a place to store their items while they were going to be down in South America. They looked into getting a storage unit, and they kind of had the same experience I think everyone has when they try to get a storage unit. And that is that all of the units close by were completely full. There was no vacancy, and they were going to have to drive like a half hour just to find a unit that had any sort of vacancy. And that unit was going to charge several $100s a month. And he just thought, as a student, there's no way I'm not going to do this. So he found a friend to let him store in his garage. And when he got back to pick his items up, 4 months later, he had the thought, this was such a better experience. I felt so much more peace of mind knowing my items were in a nice, clean garage in a neighborhood I trusted than in one of those dirty storage units. And I saved a lot of money. Why doesn't everyone do this? Why isn't there some sort of directory or marketplace for empty space? There's got to be empty space in every neighborhood in the country. So he told myself and our other co-founder about the idea. We had all, again, kind of accepted full-time jobs, and we started working on it in our senior year, competing in some business competitions, and we decided to take the plunge. So we all called our jobs up. I called Bain & Company up and said, hey, I'm not going to show up for my start date. And we went fully into Neighbor. We graduated. We still hadn't raised any money at that point. So we were kind of working for free at this stage of the business, and then we raised the seed round the summer after we graduated from the largest venture firm in Utah and the largest seed fund in Utah to kind of jumpstart the business. I'll stop there. Happy to go more into the rest of the history of the business, but that's kind of how we got started.
Yeah, I know. I love the founding story, and thanks for sharing with us on that. Yeah, so I guess kind of though going back to the early days, when you saw this kind of problem firsthand and experienced it, and wanted to build a better way, like what were the first steps that you actually took to starting it as a marketplace?
So I mean, we built this very much following the MVP model. Our first website was a landing page. It was like a WordPress landing page that had two links, become a host, become a renter, and they both take you to a Google form. And when we'd get the Google form, we'd call the renter and we'd say, hey, what do you want to store? And they'd tell us, and then we'd call the host and say, hey, they want to store this. you look like you're close by. How much do you want to charge? And we call the renter back and say, hey, they want to charge this much, and we'd agree and send out a PDF, and then we'd tell the renter to Venmo us a certain amount, and we'd Venmo out the host the rest of it. And we got like all our Venmo accounts shut down because we weren't supposed to do business transactions on Venmo, and so that was the original MVP. We then that got to be too much work, as you can imagine, and so we built a slightly more robust website where you could actually create a listing and browse on a map, and people could find each other. And so that took that part off our plate. It still didn't manage payments, so we still had to process all the payments manually. And then there came a point where we couldn't process all the payments manually, so we actually scrapped everything and built a whole new website. We'd raised money at that point, so we built out a little bit of an engineering team and built a whole new website and integrated with Stripe to manage payments.
Yeah, getting a lot of head nods here. So there's a lot of us that have taken the same kind of scrappy approach of doing the manual that also doesn't scale in the early days. So I guess before we really jump into things, I think it might be helpful maybe if you can kind of give us like an overview of what Neighbor is too.
Absolutely. So Neighbor is a peer-to-peer self-storage marketplace. You can rent out. We work with any sort of unused, underutilized space. Just a brief overview of the market for those that are interested in kind of those market dynamics. Self-storage, we feel like it very much fits the bill of one of those big, old, archaic industries like taxis and limos or hospitality that hasn't been disrupted yet. We now have more storage facilities in the United States than we do in McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, Burger King, Starbucks, Walmart's, Home Depot's, and Costco's combined. So we build a lot of storage in the United States, and it's about 96% full nationwide. That's the nationwide average occupancy. And so these storage facilities are leaving money on the table by not building more storage. And they are trying. The industry spends around $5 billion a year just on new construction of facilities, and 100% of the $5 billion in new construction gets filled every year before the year is over. So it's a very high occupancy industry, very supply constrained, which is part of the reason you see the high prices. For many Americans, storage is the single largest subscription payment that they make. You think about, you pay $10 a month for your Netflix and $30 a month for your internet. There aren't too many items that Americans are paying $300, $400, $500 a month for, besides their mortgage, which, at least you get something for a mortgage. So very large industry. It does about 8 times the amount of revenue that the entire taxi and limo industry that Uber and Lyft disrupted does. So large category, ability to build a large marketplace. And so we have people that rent out their garage, their shed, their basement, their parking spot. Most of our users are residential like that, but then we also have this commercial contingent on our platform. These are big retail REITs and office building REITs that operate at 80% occupancy. So they have 20% of their spaces that just go unfilled. And we'll work with these $10 billion REITs to onboard 10% of their portfolio to our website. And then we rent it out for storage, which increases their cash flows and their cap rates on the building. So we have kind of both components, although we're predominantly a residential marketplace. I think we always will be, just because there's more volume there.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing with us on that. And definitely sounds like quite the TAM. So one I wasn't really aware of. So kind of like going back to the early days, though, how did, we all kind of face like the cold start problem, right, as marketplaces, and kind of given how fragmented, probably some of your suppliers or hosts were, like, how did you initially kind of solve that, challenge and really kind of onboard, your initial kind of hosts?
Yeah. I like to think of users, and I don't think this will be a new example for anyone, as kind of concentric circles, right? You have kind of these circles that contain each other, and the users that you're going after initially are kind of that white hot core, if you will, of early adopters. when we first started this business, we tried as much as possible to do as little marketing as possible, and to really focus on the engineering side of things, the product side of things, because we wanted to iterate before we went and spent a bunch of marketing dollars. And I don't think all marketplaces take this approach. The whole point of a marketplace is scale and network effects. So a lot of people try to scale it up really fast. We kind of took the opposite approach of let's let users come to us organically. We'll do a little marketing here and there, but then let's just iterate and be highly adaptable. And we really focused on Utah, which is where we're headquartered. We only acquired users in the Utah market. And then once we felt like we had strong product market fit, then we started expanding aggressively outside of Utah and using more scalable channels. So, solving the cold start problem, I mean, initially we found our first host by knocking doors, right? So there's kind of the do things that don't scale there, but I don't know that I'd necessarily recommend that to anyone. We did a lot of, door flyering. We came up with some creative ideas where, we didn't want our flyers to get thrown in the trash. So we would clip a $1 bill to all of our flyers. And the flyer said, "This is the first dollar that you'll earn renting out your space on Neighbor." You cover 1,000 houses. It's $1,000, but it sticks with people and people remember it. And you don't need that many hosts to start out a marketplace. I think people overestimate the amount of liquidity that they need initially. Airbnb's number for a city early was 100 to 300 hosts, kind of 300 being peak liquidity that they needed in a market. I think Uber operated with, they needed like 20 drivers within a certain radius sort of thing. So kind of finding what you need in the early market, and then just finding creative ways to get that white hot core that'll give you a lot of feedback and deal with a really, really crappy product. And onboard to a website. We're called neighbor.com today, but in the early days we were called Neighbor with a Y. So NEIYBOR. So people that would join a platform called Neighbor and actually onboard their space, you need to find those users.
Yeah, certainly. It's definitely a great domain today. So so like back to that kind of your first market that you were in, what were some kind of those like initial kind of signals that you did have like product market fit?
I think I think there's different signals that you look for over time. Initially we're looking for we're really dialed into how many people make money on the platform without having 10 problems, right? It's like reducing your problem like error rate, because so many people are going to have so many problems with their transactions. Later on, I think you pay a lot more attention to like organic signals. So, raising kind of at that Series A stage, we started paying a lot of attention to, okay, we have a lot of markets where we've never launched the market. We've never spent a single dime in that market. And yet we're having hosts sign up. We're having renters sign up and rent those host spaces, all without us doing anything. And that kind of tug where whether we like it or not, people are going to use the product. That's what we look for later. But I think early on, you want to be in close, like we knew the names. We'd never met them before they signed up on the platform. But once they signed up, like we knew the names of our first 1,000 hosts in Utah. And we would, when there was a problem, we would like go personally rent a moving truck and show up at their house and like help, someone's in Asia and their stuff's in the house and the house is selling. And so the stuff needs to be moved. Like we'd go move it ourselves. Today we have automated processes for all of that.
That's really cool to hear. So I did actually have a question as far as, you mentioned the different markets, so what sense of kind of scale are you at today, and how many markets do you operate in?
We have users, essentially active users in essentially every single city in every state in the country. So it's our marketplace definitely lends itself more to geographic distribution than many do. I don't think this is necessarily a sign of like, oh, this is the best marketplace in the world. Airbnb doesn't have users in every single city in every state in the country because they're more of a destination marketplace. You're going to get a lot of listings in San Francisco and even small cities too. You're going to get a lot of Airbnb listings in Moab, Utah, because it's a destination. A lot of people visit Moab, Utah, but you're not going to get a lot of Airbnbs, if any, in like Clinton, Utah, because no one travels to Clinton, Utah. And similar with Uber. Uber, you're going to have lots of Ubers in every major city in the country, and they make a lot of money, but you're not going to have Ubers in some random city in Kentucky because no one takes taxis in that random city. And so when you look at storage, if you go to a town that doesn't even have a post office, it's so small, it's going to have multiple self-storage facilities. That's how ubiquitous storage is. Again, back to kind of the numbers thing, like there's around 19,000 cities in the United States. There's 14,000 McDonald's, which is why they seem like they're everywhere, because they are. There's almost a McDonald's in every city in the country. There's 60,000 storage facilities. So storage is just, it's literally in every city. And so our platform can be in every city. Anyway, that's a long answer to a short question.
No, that was great. That was definitely, really helpful. So I'm kind of curious, are there any like non-obvious problems that, maybe earlier on you weren't really aware of that you were solving for with a neighbor, and, maybe even like the kind of product experience that you've created?
Yeah, absolutely. More than I can count. But one like user thing that we, I don't know, just our assumptions were incorrect about this, is we thought that people would want to use us because we are cheaper, and we are. We're like 30 to 50% cheaper than a traditional self-storage unit, which is, this isn't like saving 10% on your Amazon cart. This is meaningful money, because if you're paying $300 a month for something, saving 30 to 50%, it's like $1,000 to $2,000 a year. I mean, we like to tell our users, if you switch from a traditional unit to a neighbor unit, we'll give you a stimulus check in savings every year for the rest of your life. So we thought that was going to be the big draw from a demand perspective, is how cheap it is. But as we've gathered user feedback and as we've gotten lots of reviews and NPS scores over the years, hands down, the biggest thing that people call out is just that it's easier. Not that it's cheaper. It's that instead of having to drive a half hour across town to some industrial park and sign a bunch of paperwork, I can just download an app and a couple clicks, and I know I have my space. And it's like, okay, that Saturday project's done already. I still got to go move the items, but the booking of the space is so much easier. And that we didn't anticipate at all. And it changes how you'd want to approach those users and talk to them and market to them. And so we marketed for several years, just as cheaper. We still include that in our marketing, but we've really shifted our marketing message to focus on the convenience aspect. The Self-Storage Almanac, which is kind of an industry research guide, talks about how proximity is the single biggest factor in someone choosing a storage unit. They will choose a more expensive storage unit that's closer to their home over a cheaper storage facility that's further away. You just want the closest facility to your home. And neighbor, I mean, it's why we're called neighbor. We're literally, as proximate as you can get. We just didn't lean quite as much into that as we would. I can think of a few other examples, unless you want to move to another question.
Oh no, I'd love to get into more examples. That'd be great. So
yeah, and so just to restate it again, it was things that were kind of non-obvious on the platform. One thing that was non-obvious for us is that we thought this was going to be, in some ways, we're the most hyper-local marketplace ever. Airbnb, you're staying in a different city than where you live. Like, you stay in an Airbnb in Thailand. Uber, I use an Uber when I'm in Chicago and I don't have a rental car and I need to get an Uber. I'm probably never going to talk to my Uber driver ever again after I step out of that car. Same with an Airbnb host. I'm probably never going to talk to them. Neighbors one of the first platforms, at least, that you use a neighbor, and then and it's a 6 month or 12 month or 18 month or 24 month transaction or longer, and you live quite close to them. You're probably going to talk to them all the time, and build a relationship. So it's very hyper local, and the supply and demand need to be hyper local. So we thought, we knew, we didn't just think, we knew that this business was going to need to be built city by city, location by location, where we build up enough supply and we build up enough demand. And we were totally wrong. Like, we were completely wrong about that. We followed an Uber playbook for all the markets we launched. It was like Uber. We had a GM in the market and a community manager in the market, and it worked really well. Like, when LA was our first market outside of Utah, and when we launched in LA with like an Uber style GM, we got as many hosts in the first 7 weeks in LA as we'd gotten in the first year and a half in Utah. So it was like, okay, we've got a repeatable playbook. And so we were really hesitant to move away from a playbook that was working. But it turns out that a national model, you would think it wouldn't work for a localized marketplace like us. But again, we just overestimated what kind of liquidity we needed in markets. Like, there was organic liquidity being created. And once we saw that users were signing up, and just a few users were able to get rented, and that there was this kind of one-to-one relationship, and you didn't need a whole host of users, you just needed users. Then we shifted to a national model, and now we don't have a single employee outside of the state of Utah. We're entirely headquarter centric. We don't have market launchers or anything like that. It's much more of an Airbnb style marketing playbook, and that was a total, like, even after we, even up until the point where we raised our Series A, we were still kind of on the other side of that question.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was actually going to ask about the the kind of like the playbook that you use for expansion. Is that's something that comes up quite a bit as far as in the community, founders sharing their expansion playbooks here. So you did mention also too the the fundraising, right? And so you have some pretty incredible investors, at the Andreessen Horowitz, and I believe Jeff Jordan's on your board too, right? So
That's right.
So what was that what was that fundraising journey like?
Oh, that was a crazy process. Our seed round was fairly straightforward. We competed in some of these business competitions, and investors saw us at business competitions, invited us in, and I wouldn't call it an easy round, but it certainly wasn't like the stories you hear of, like, grueling, rounds to raise. It was hard, but doable, and we raised a $2.5 million seed round. For the A round, I was ready to. We had a good business; it was growing really quickly. I was ready to go raise a round and get it done really quickly. And this is when we brought in Andreessen Horowitz. So I wanted to run a really tight process. Go out to investors kind of all in the same month, pitch investors, give them 2 weeks, and try to push to a term sheet within a month. Well, I did that, and wasn't able to accomplish my goals there, and it started stretching. It's always a bad sign when your fundraising starts stretching, right? And so it was turning into quite a difficult process. We were dead set, though, on bringing in some marketplace expertise. We wanted to bring in a strong marketplace investor. So we were really paying attention to the partners at the firms, not the firms themselves. Our two Utah investors, Pelion Ventures and Album Ventures, phenomenal partners for us. We've loved working with them, but most of their investments are SaaS companies, right? Utah is kind of known for its enterprise SaaS. That's most of the companies here, and so most of their experiences in SaaS. We really wanted to bring someone on that had strong marketplace expertise that could help us see around corners. Jeff is kind of the quintessential example of that, right? Built, for those who aren't familiar with Jeff Jordan, he built eBay.com, was president of PayPal, CEO of OpenTable, and took them public. co-founded Wealthfront. Now he sits on the board of Airbnb and Instacart and Pinterest and OfferUp and some others. Just a phenomenal, probably the best marketplace investor in history. And we got introduced through one of our investors to Jeff, and it's just amazing to see how Andreessen runs their process. Many investors will ask you the question like, "Hey, who else is interested? Like, how far along are you with other investors?" I never once got that kind of question from Andreessen. They don't care. They don't. For those of you on this call that have raised from Andreessen, they could care less what any other investor is doing or how they're thinking about it. From the first meeting I met with Jeff. He was my last meeting out in San Francisco, and drove to the airport after that meeting, after having like 5 investor meetings out there. Drove to the airport to head back, and I was standing in line to board my plane to Utah, and they called boarding already. I was like, the line was moving forward, and I get this email from Jeff, and he's like, "Hey, we really like this. We need 3 GPs to sign off on it. Normally it takes me a couple of weeks to round up GPs, but if you can be here at 9 a.m. tomorrow, I can get myself and Mark Andreessen and Andrew Chen in a room, and we can approve this." And so I walked out of the line, stepped out of the line and got an Airbnb and met with them the next morning, and just had a phenomenal kind of, less of a pitch, more of a working style environment where we just talked about the business, how to grow it. Really liked the approach they took, and 3 days from meeting them, we had a term sheet. So it's kind of one of those processes. It was really difficult at the start, but once we found the right partners that really understood the dynamics, it was really easy. It just took 4 months to get there, of feeling like we're never going to find the right partner and we're never going to raise the round that we want. And then it ended as well as it possibly could.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. Now, it sounds like an easy decision to miss that flight. So
yeah.
Yeah. So,
Definitely.
So on the note of kind of like more recently, your growth, could you share a little bit more about, maybe some of the biggest kind of factors that have contributed to that growth?
Yeah, one is the shift to a more national approach. That's always kind of a scary shift for a business, because of course you can spend a lot of money nationwide and have it be a drop in the bucket and no one notices you, and then you now just wasted a lot of money and gotten nowhere. And we definitely had those fears in shifting to more of a nationwide business, but it really paid off for us in efficiencies. Just national kind of marketing is a lot more efficient. I'd say also our investments in the organic side of the business have really paid off. We have a very strong like search engine optimization model that provides a ton of traffic for us. There's just a lot of our reservations we don't have to pay for, which really helps on the unit economics side. And then just a lot of like, not to use too buzzwordy terms, but like product-led growth, right? Making significant investments in engineering and paying attention to the data. Like we've built out a lot more robust data team than I think you'd typically see at our stage of company, because we track literally everything on the site, every little thing, and we're constantly optimizing it, and it surfaces problems really quickly when you have that kind of data level insight. There's some decent tools these days that can help you get pretty good insight into your business pretty fast without necessarily kind of breaking the bank on data. That just gives you a lot of user insights, and you can start iterating faster.
Yeah, that's great. That's probably going to lead to some questions here in a little bit. So, which we're going to jump into, by the way. So, otherwise, you and I can just go on for quite some time. But before we get to the group questions, you have some pretty incredible experience, building and scaling Neighbor. So, do you have any tips for early stage marketplace founders that might be helpful?
Well, the first is that every marketplace is different. we've made the mistake several times of trying to look at the larger marketplaces, and or what at the time were the larger marketplaces compared to us, and saying, oh, this worked for them, maybe that strategy will work for us. And many times that's been the wrong decision, right? We have a very different marketplace with very different users, with very different motives and incentives and different timeframes. One of these is take like an Airbnb. You let's talk about how you book an Airbnb trip. Most people plan well out in advance. They decide they want to go on vacation in the summer. I get online today. I browse Airbnbs. You're probably not going to book it the day before you fly out to where you're vacationing, right? You're at least a couple weeks in advance. So there's more planning that goes into that. You're also not bringing anything except yourself. You're not expected to have any room for your luggage or anything like that. You just kind of you'll put it somewhere. They just need a bed, right? You need to know that the beds look, and kind of tell that with photos. On our platform, it's a different experience. First, there's a lot less planning that goes into it. Many people wake up one day and they think, oh shoot, I need storage. I'm moving, in 2 days. I need it really quick. It's an afterthought. It's the last thing people want to do or think about. And so, most of our reservations, they're moving in, within 72 hours of placing a reservation. Like it's a fast turnaround time. Also, there's a lot more risk that your items don't fit in the space, right? So there's less time for planning and more that needs to be planned. And so the way that you create that experience, if you just imitate, an Airbnb style experience, you're totally going to miss the boat on how that experience and how that interaction should be set up. And so that'd be my first thing, is just like, don't get too hung up on other marketplaces. I think try to pull the principles away, which for those of you who don't follow like NFX and their blog, they do a great job of boiling it down to the principles rather than the practices. You don't often read about like, oh, you should build this on your website from NFX. It's think about your users strategically like this. So boiling it down to marketplace principles instead of practices, because the practices usually won't work if you just copy and paste them. The second thing would be, don't get too hung up on it seems like all the marketplace literature focuses on the whole chicken and egg thing. If for early marketplace startups, like don't get too hung up on that, of like figuring out which is better, the chicken or the egg or all that stuff. Just pay attention to your renter and pay attention to your host, and constantly be doing things that will make it easier for both of them to onboard. Because the fact of the matter is, if you look at the first 2.5 years of our business, we flip-flopped from like supply being most important to demand being most important to supply being most important. Every 4 to 6 months, we'd flop back and forth. As you get bigger, it will become very obvious. Once you're a nationwide company, you'll know if you're supply constrained or demand constrained, and that'll work itself out. You don't need to answer that question in the first, 2 or 3 years. You just need to like pick a market or pick a couple of markets and get enough supply and enough demand. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can waste some supply. You can have some supply that never gets rented. You can have some demand that doesn't ever find a space. You just need to increase the count of users that are successful. And then you can work on efficiencies, and like making sure everyone's matched perfectly and has this great experience when you have the scale to provide the data to make the right decisions.
Those are all really great points. That's I'm going to come back to a few questions that I have actually on that in a little bit here. We're going to jump into group questions if that sounds good to you. Hey, Zach, did you want to jump on?
Yeah, thanks, Remy. Yeah, Mike. Joseph, good to meet you. I'm Zach. I own a
Nice to meet you too.
trash and recycling collection marketplace. Started about 6 years ago. So
Very cool.
I'm in the process of, we're going kind of from a lifestyle business to a raise it, grow it, sell it model. And so I actually have two questions. One's kind of probably a little bit easier of a answer. And then the second one, maybe a little bit more detailed. But the first thing is, have you guys thought about land and using land as storage for like boats and RVs and stuff? Or do you do that already?
The answer is yes. We have a ton of like vacant lots all over the country that yeah. Lots of that.
Cool. And then the second thing is how did you come up with raising 2.5 as a seed round? And were you pre-revenue at the time?
Yeah. But before I jump into that, I'll just say I don't know if you know him, but I'm good friends with Ryan at Recyclops, if you know that company. I don't know if you've ever talked with them, but happy to make an introduction if you guys ever want to share notes. Sounds similar to kind of what you guys are building. How did we come up with 2.5?
And I guess the question there is more so, you came up with a valuation as a seed round. I'm sure you're with 3 other founders trying to protect dilution as much as possible. And you have this whole 10 to 15 realm for a seed and 15 to 25 for a Series A. And so how did you decide 2.5 as it relates to diluting yourself?
So we weren't pre-revenue. We had already started getting users on the business. With that said, it was like negligent, or negligible. There was not enough revenue to justify a seed round. So you could call us pre-revenue, but we did have revenue. It was growing each month. But I've heard it said, and I kind of ascribe to this philosophy that especially at the seed stage, people are looking for 5 things, right? And those 5 things are people, really big market, and a good idea. And the good idea is probably the least important of the 5. They're ultimately investing in you as a person. Are you the right person to go after this field? And do they think it's a big market that could support a, $5 billion company or greater? So that's like the first thing I'll say. The second thing is we definitely didn't necessarily pick a number. And later on, I think you worry about the dynamics of the business for dilution, but early, the fact of the matter is there's no seed investor in the country that builds a model to determine your valuation, right? Your valuation is determined by dividing the amount you raise by the ownership that they need. That's how you get the valuation. It's how every seed investor derives the valuation. And so if and a seed investor, depending on how hyped up you are or whether you're in YC or not, you're going to take somewhere between 15 to 30% dilution on a seed round. And most seed rounds are probably in the 20 to 25% range. And so you can basically take how much you're raising. If you're raising $3 million and an investor is willing to give you $3 million or lead a round that's $3 million, then if it's 25% dilution, then the post money is going to be 12, right? If it's 20%, the post money is going to be 15, right? Pre-money is going to be 12. And it doesn't make any logical sense, but that's how the world works. So it's mostly about like how large of a round can you get that seed investor to raise. There's all sorts of thoughts on like how much should you raise in a seed round? Should you take on less? Do you want to get ahead of yourself just because you can raise at a $25 million, pre-money seed round? Should you? Because it's a lot of valuation to grow into fast. And I don't know who's right about that. There's so many companies that have done both and been successful, but I think that's how seed valuations work at the very least. Do you want me to? Did I answer the question well, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think my biggest thing is like, we're open to taking more money, obviously, than we're raising $1.5 million. And so we're open to taking on more money. It just kind of depends on the term. So we're just starting to kind of branch out and network with as many folks as we can. And so
and when you get the term sheet, like that, all that stuff starts to be flexible as well. So like you know, you just got to focus on getting the term sheet for whatever. When we raised the A round, for example, Andreessen was like, here's the valuation, here's how much we'll put in, and here's how much you can take in addition to us. Here's how much syndicated money you can take in addition to us. And we were like, well, hey, there's a lot of interest from syndicated. And they were like, we need to have this. They told us we need to have this ownership stake. We need to own this much of the company after this round is over. And so we went back to them and we're like, okay, will you write a $2 million bigger check? And so that we can take more money from these other people and we up the valuation by this much. You'll still have the same ownership percentage. You just have to write a check for more money and we'll just up the valuation. And they were like, yep, sounds good. We just need our ownership. The valuations within a certain range is kind of meaningless.
Sure.
At those early stages. So
yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, okay. That's great. Yeah, I appreciate the feedback. It would be great to connect with you outside of this for sure. And, you know, love to meet the folks over at Recyclops. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. That was a great question.
Send me an email.
Awesome. Thanks. Hey, yeah, I actually had a question for you myself, you know, and that's on the team, right? So like, how big is your team today? And maybe are there any kind of like hiring tips, you know, that have worked well for you?
Yeah. Man, this is another area where there's a lot of opinions and they're all good ones. I'll tell you our perspective. Our first core value in the company is to hire and develop the best. And what that means for us is in many steps, you of course, no startup's going to hire the worst, right? No one's going to go hire people that suck at the job. But in most startups, you really need a position filled and you go out to hire and someone comes along, you pass on all the bad people, but someone comes along that's good enough to do the job. And so you hire them. That for us is not hiring and developing the best. And there really is such thing as a 10x engineer versus a 1x engineer. And that's true for every position in our opinion. Some people disagree about this, but in our opinion, so like I remember when we were hiring our first digital marketer in 2018, we really needed a digital marketer. Like every month that went by that we didn't have it, and my co-founder was running marketing, we were losing money that we could be opportunity cost, right? We could be growing faster. And we started interviewing and we got a really strong applicant pool. We were interviewing all these people. They'd all spent millions of dollars on different ad platforms, but we didn't feel like they had the strong statistical analytics background that we were looking for to optimize, to build strong optimization capabilities. And so 1 month went by, 2 months went by, 3 months, we were passing on all these great candidates. 6 months go by. The business is really hurting by this point by not bringing someone in. We've interviewed 60 candidates in person in the office and said no to all of them. And finally, this digital marketer came along that was not only had a strong ads background, but had a strong statistical analytics background. We hired him on the spot. He still leads our digital team today. And that's made a major difference in our business, hiring someone who's 10x. We passed on a lot of people that had amazing titles or whatever, and we really focus on the core hard capabilities. We do a lot of like testing. We put our engineers through a lot of, they have to go through like 3 rounds of coding problems, and we want to hire the best because they produce such outsized value for the company. And another kind of hiring practice that we've adopted is we do all of our hiring ourselves, even up until this point. We have never ever hired a single person with a recruiting agency. We just feel like it's a network effects problem. Recruiting agencies are a network effects problem. All the people that are great, and there's obviously exceptions to this. There's recruiting agencies that place great people, but on average, the people that are great, they have people knocking at their door. They don't need to go to a recruiting agency to get placed. They've always got 10 offers in their LinkedIn inbox. And so you miss out on those, and then same thing on the company side of things. It's kind of like this spiral. So we have our hiring, we have our our managers participate heavily in the sourcing, the recruiting, and that's paid big dividends on the talent pool for us. We just hired our first in-house recruiter 6 months ago. So we operated for 4.5 years with all of our recruiters were our leaders in the business, our VPs and me. I still interview every single person that we hire in the business. I just think it's so important as a CEO to stay on top of talent density.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks for sharing with us. It certainly sounds like you have an incredible team. So it's definitely working well. So cool. So I think we might have time for one more question. Hey, Tomas, do you want to jump on?
Cool. Sounds good. Thanks, Mike. Awesome, Joseph. Really appreciate you taking the time. Super insightful. We really appreciate the conversation. Quick intro. So I co-founded a company called SimpleSurf, and we are essentially a storage marketplace for outdoor gear, where we build in the surf vertical surfboard lockers on unused property space right by the beach.
Cool.
So definitely love the idea of just like, connecting extra space with folks who are really looking for that space. Yeah, love the stickiness of of that experience too. One of the questions I had was around your host guarantee. How early into building Neighbor did you guys put together that guarantee? And like, when did it start to really require kind of more kind of back end ops to maintain it as claims are actually coming in?
Yeah. So just kind of for everyone else on our platform, we have a $1 million host guarantee. That's kind of similar to all the marketplaces, Airbnb, Uber. They've all got $1 million host guarantee. We've also got on the renter side, we're kind of unique, and you're similar on your platform. Most marketplaces don't have to provide any sort of protection on the renter side. Like an Airbnb guest doesn't bring anything to the transaction. You don't need to like insure their stuff or anything like that. Or an Uber rider, you got to protect the Uber driver's car, but you don't have to protect the Uber rider except for like liability, which is included in the host piece, the host protection. With a storage marketplace, you have to protect the items being stored. That's actually a fundamental component of the storage. But you're asking specifically about the host guarantee, or not the renter guarantee, right? So the host guarantee, is honestly the easier guarantee for us because it's just a liability guarantee. We're just protecting the host is essentially a business owner. And because they're operating a business, they have liability. What if someone like slips and falls on the property and there's a lawsuit? And insurers largely are comfortable with general liability policies. There's some custom stuff you have to do for a marketplace, but there's a lot of underwriters right now that are willing to take a crack at this. The way we stood up our first $1 million guarantee is we went and found this underwriter that had never done a marketplace policy before. It was a big national underwriter, and they wanted to get into the space. And so they were willing to work with us a little bit, and they wrote a custom policy that fit our platform. And we were able to pay them, I think our initial premium, 3 or 4 years ago was like $25,000 a year. And they'd give us this, $1 million guarantee. That then grew over time. And now we've shifted over to where we're working with like the Lloyd's groups and some of the groups that write the bigger, Airbnb and Uber style $1 million guarantees. But you don't have to do that initially. You just have to have someone that backstops it. I'd also say you don't get a ton of claims on the host side. At least we haven't, because again, it's liability. So even today, we don't really get a ton of claims there. Most of the claims for us come in through the renter side, where some renter's items, for whatever reason, got damaged. Maybe it rained and there was water damage. You're going to deal even less with that with the surfboards. Like, it's hard to damage a surfboard unless it gets lost or stolen or something like that. So you'll mostly deal with like theft there. But yeah, it's just we literally just talked to our local self-insurance brokers. We talked to probably 25 different brokers in the state of Utah until we found someone that was willing to go out and take a crack at creating policies for us. Right now, we actually work with a group on the renter side. We work with a group that just spun out of Turo called Tint. I think they help like Outdoorsy and some of them as well. They're a great group to get in contact with. They can also help broker you policy if you're trying to identify $1 million policy. They kind of know the landscape. You might have to push them to try for some like lower tier insurers first at your stage, because I think they'd probably typically go after like a Lloyd's group.
Matthias is actually in the community, so he's done a workshop with us on insurance. So so he's great. So that's cool to hear that you guys work with them. So
yeah, they're phenomenal. We've really enjoyed working with them.
Sorry, just want to jump in so that way tomorrow's we can connect the dots on that too. So. Hey Joseph, so I had a question for you as far as like on the renter side. Is it industry standard if someone's going to rent like a commercial storage space? Is there any insurance in place there, or is that kind of unique to your marketplace and part of the value prop?
Yeah, that's part of the value prop, and it's something that most people don't understand when they're getting a storage unit, is that they're not getting any sort of protection. So if you rent a storage facility, and this is basically every storage facility in the country. This isn't just like a few of them. It's basically everyone. And all of your stuff gets stolen, you're on the hook to replace all of your stuff. If the place floods or burns down, you're on the hook to replace all of your stuff. In fact, when we raised the Andreessen round, I got a call from one of our investors like a month after the round closed. And he was like, hey, I remember you telling me in the pitch, we have this little stat in there that 1 in 10 self-storage facilities gets broken into each year. It's super high crime rates because they're all industrial, and there's items there, and it's easy to like drive up, clip the lock, unload everything. So storage facilities are the most robbed buildings in the country. People kind of avoid residential areas because they're, dogs, alarm systems. Like you don't even know if you're going to get anything valuable. It's kind of a crapshoot. So if you look at the FBI statistics, on self-storage versus residential has about 6 times lower break-in rate than self-storage facilities do. If you look at our platform data, we're like 1,000x safer because we operate in every single city in every state in the country, and you can count on less than one hand the amount of break-ins we've had on the platform. So it's yeah. Anyway, we got that call from an investor shortly after, and he's like, I remember you shared that stat. And he was like, my son just called me and said my whole storage facility got broken into. And he's like, I went down to the facility and was like, hey, are you guys going to replace my items? And they're like, no, absolutely not. And he was like, well, okay, well, I'm never going to use you again. And they were like, okay, we operate at 98% capacity. We have a waiting list of 20 people waiting for your spot. Like we could care less if you never use us again. We're so supply constrained. And so that's the industry. And so by providing a little bit of protection here, we offer the safest storage in the country.
Wow, that's a pretty crazy story, and definitely another reason of why Neighbor. So well, cool. So we're almost out of time here, but this is a really great chat. And I definitely appreciate taking the time to join us. Last kind of question that I had for you before we wrap things up, though, if you were to go back, to right before you started Neighbor, what would you tell yourself about marketplaces?
I'd say be careful what you're getting into. Marketplaces are really hard, which I'm sure everyone on this call can relate to. Marketplaces are it's one thing to build a product that satisfies one customer. It's an entirely different thing to build a product that satisfies 2 completely different customers that are not even business customers, but they're residential customers who are in and of themselves diverse and unique. I would have cautioned myself. I'm mostly kidding. I've really enjoyed it. I probably would have also told myself to. I probably would have also told myself all of the channels that have the lowest CACs and the highest LTV.
Little cheat code there. I like that one. So first a disclaimer, and then the cheat code. So that's awesome. Right. Well, this is a really great chat, and once again, really appreciate taking the time to join us here. We're all definitely big fans of Neighbor, and also wanted to give a big, thanks to Casey for setting this up. And by the way, Colton's in the community too, and he's been super helpful with founders in the past. So, really love it. Right before we wrap things up, though, time for a quick plug. Where can we keep up to you at?
Oh, I don't know that anyone wants to keep up with me, but I have a Twitter. I have, feel free to friend me on LinkedIn if I can be helpful providing any sort of connections in my network. My email is joseph@neighbor.com. And then otherwise just follow Neighbor and we post our updates there.
Awesome. We certainly will. Well, you'll have a bunch of new marketplace founder followers. So, well, cool. Well, thanks again for taking the time to join us. This is a good one. So, and thanks everyone
Joseph.
everyone for the great questions today.